It's a Top 10 Tuesday, so today we're looking at the top 10 movies that critics hated but audiences love. Hi, my name is Sean, and I love to talk about movies way too much. With that in mind, go ahead and join me down below in the comment section. Share your picks for the 10 movies where you see the biggest gap between critical hate and audience praise. As I was putting my list together, I looked at kind of the Rotten Tomatoes scores, the CinemaScore, and that's kind of a poll of people as they come out of the theater having seen the film. I looked at the box office trajectory where they're going up despite reviews going down, and then just kind of anecdotal experience and my perspective of the people that I've talked to and the conversations I've had. One more thing before we get started, this video is brought to you by my supporters over on Patreon. Patreon is a membership site for my channel where you can unlock weekly exclusive videos, a weekly AMA where I answer everybody's questions. At a certain level, you can get your name on my end card, and at the top tier, you can have a monthly video chat with me. You can see if Patreon is right for you at the link down below in the description, and let's get started. Kicking things off is The Greatest Showman, the period piece musical starring Hugh Jackman and Zac Efron. Now, the movie has a 56% on Rotten Tomatoes, which isn't actually dreadful, but if you dive into the reviews themselves, they were not very kind to the film, even when being a little bit positive. Basically, they presented it as a bland musical with forgettable songs, revisionist history that's carried only because Hugh Jackman and Zac Efron are just so likable. Then the movie came out, and it absolutely bombed opening weekend because there's just no buzz. But the 7 people that did go see the movie absolutely loved it and got an A CinemaScore, which is a really good score. Then they went back the next week, brought 7 friends along with them, and then they brought more friends, and it created this momentum where the people that went to go see it absolutely loved this movie and all that stuff about a forgettable musical with bad songs. The target audience could not disagree more with the take of the critics. My wife, in fact, literally went to go see this movie every single week for about 2 months straight, and she's not someone that does that kind of thing. Number 9, Space Jam, a combination of Looney Tunes, NBA stars of the 90s, a few comedians, and a pre-scandal R. Kelly that only got a 43% on Rotten Tomatoes. Critics just kind of found it to be a pretty bland use of all of the personalities involved. They went after Michael Jordan's acting as well as many of the other basketball players acting in the film and just thought it was a gimmick to try and trick people into buying movie tickets. People bought movie tickets and they actually had a good time with the movie. It got an A- CinemaScore and became a very financially successful film, so much so that here we are 25 years later and they keep talking about wanting to do a sequel, a follow-up, reboot, who knows what it would end up being. And then it just became a staple of cable television that it seemed like every Saturday afternoon when I was in high school and in college, this movie was playing on some cable television station. Number 8, National Treasure 1 and 2. These are the Nicolas Cage adventure films from about 15 years ago. Little bit infamous for having the plot point about him stealing the Declaration of Independence because it had a treasure map on the back of it. Now it seems like critics couldn't get past some of the stupidity inside of the concept, so it only has a 46% for the first movie and only a 36% for the second film. However, both films were massive hits. The first one did $350 million. The second one did $450 million. And this was a while ago where that was a lot of money for a movie like this to make. Both also received an A- on CinemaScore. And this is one of these film franchises that everyone you talk to thinks it's really stupid and dumb. And everyone kind of has a lot of fun with it. Whether it's just a guilty pleasure franchise or just solid family entertainment that kind of leans into its silliness while kind of having a nice patriotic bent to it. People seem to enjoy these movies while the critics really didn't. Number 7, Die Hard with a Vengeance. This is a movie I was actually really surprised to learn that it's rotten on Rotten Tomatoes. No, it's got a 52%. That's not dreadful. It's not really all that good. But the disparity here is that this is widely regarded as one of the best action movie sequels of all time. Some people even think it's better than the original Die Hard. that is usually considered one of the best action movies of all time. And so much so that, like I said, I didn't even realize that it had a negative reception when it first came out from the critics, because these days, most people are just very positive about this film and think it was a nice, different take that added something new to the franchise, explored the character in a different way. But back in the day, critics just thought that they were stretching the concept too thin and didn't have enough new to add. For a more recent example, Venom. I put up a poll yesterday asking which movies had to be included in this list, and absolutely one of the most common responses was Venom, the Tom Hardy comic book movie. Now, when critics went to see it, they only gave it a 29%. They were vicious, tearing this movie to pieces about its script, plot, and just the overall tone, feeling like it didn't know what it wanted to do. And then audiences went to go see it, and it way overperformed. It's a movie that only cost $100 million, and it made $850 million, which is a very profitable film. And it seemed like the target audience got exactly what they wanted. It has a B+ CinemaScore, which is a solid CinemaScore. So this is one of those examples where critics went in and they just saw a mess, but audiences saw just a wildly entertaining, weird comic book adventure that was a little bit offbeat, didn't play by the rules that critics are looking into, and so they had a good time. Bringing us into the top 5 is Bad Boys 2. At the peak of Will Smith's career and at the peak of Michael Bay's pre-Transformers career, they decided to reunite and give us Bad Boys 2, and critics hated it and only gave it a 23%, which is a really bad Rotten Tomatoes score. I mean, they were just tearing apart the plot. They thought it was overlong. It was over the top. The humor didn't land. Then audiences went to go see it, and they gave it an A CinemaScore, which is fantastic. The people that saw the trailer and went, I want to go see that, loved what they got. Critics, I guess, just didn't want to go see the movie, and so what they saw did not work for them. The movie went on to be a big hit at its time as a rated R action movie. It made a ton of money, and of course people have been talking about this film for years and years and years, and just earlier this year, a few months back, we finally got a sequel to it that this one actually won over the critics and had a really good Rotten Tomatoes score. Number 4, Hook. Back in the early 90s, Steven Spielberg decided to tackle the Peter Pan mythology and cast Robin Williams as a grown-up Peter Pan. He had Julia Roberts as Tinkerbell and Dustin Hoffman as Hook. What could possibly go wrong with Spielberg behind the camera and that cast in front of it? Well, to the critics, an awful lot. They only gave it a 28%, which is brutal for a Steven Spielberg film to be that low. As for me, I was like 10 years old when this movie came out. I was the target audience. So I was there opening weekend. I had all the toys. To this day, I still have some unopened packages of some of the toys in my garage as collector's items, and I just ate this movie up and watched it all the time, and apparently I wasn't alone. It got an A- on CinemaScore, and it went on to make $300 million at the box office, which is a whole lot of money for a movie to make 30 years ago. Real quick before I give you my top 3, remember to share your picks down below in the comment section. Also, if you want me to make a follow-up to this video with the reverse, movies that critics loved but audiences hated, let me know down below in the comment section. I've already got the list made. I just want to know if you want me to make the video. In third place, Rocky IV. 1985 was the year Stallone just dominated the box office. Between Rocky IV and Rambo First Blood Part 2, he had 2 enormous back-to-back hits that were both hated by critics. In the case of Rocky IV, it only has a 40% on Rotten Tomatoes, but critics were even more savage than that at the time. It won 5 Razzies. It was nominated for several more. In some of the cases, it lost out to Rambo First Blood Part 2. However, audiences absolutely ate this movie up, went in droves. It made so much money that it was the highest grossing sports movie of all time for 25 years until The Blind Side came out only just about 10 years ago. And here we are about 35 years later, and this is kind of one of those 80s staples, a classic movie that's just kind of made its way into the pop culture with so many memorable scenes, iconic characters, some of which came back just a couple years back in the movie Creed 2. This is a perfect example of critics just not being on the same wavelength as the audiences in what they were looking for at that time. Our runner-up, Home Alone 2, Lost in New York. The original Home Alone has become a Christmas classic. It was an insanely big hit when it came out, so they quickly cranked out a sequel that was also a massive box office hit, and from my perspective, basically just as well loved as the original film. I was the target age for both of the original Home Alone films when they came out, and I just ate both of them up. And to this day, I know a number of people that think the second one might be better than the original one, just a little bit funnier in the execution of the humor, and there's some nice additions like with Tim Curry and Rob Schneider in the mix at the hotel. Critics, however, had a very different perspective and only gave it a 33% on Rotten Tomatoes. They just thrashed it for just being a rehash of the other one that followed the exact template, which, while that is true, it still seemed to have that sparkle and magic that makes people enjoy it. Now here we are, 30 years later, I've got a bunch of kids and they love this movie just as much as they love the original one, and they want to rewatch it just as much as the original one. But coming in first place is Transformers 2 through 5. This is an odd one because critics hate the movies, online comment sections love to trash these movies, but all objective evidence says that audiences had a great time with these films. The second one has a 20%, the third a 35%, the fourth an 18%, and the fifth only a 15% on Rotten Tomatoes. So critics have been trashing these movies, and they trashed them back to back to back, but the audience reception didn't line up with the critical hate at all, with the CinemaScores being a B+, an A for Age of Extinction, and a B+. Add to that, the box office trajectory was going up. Age of Extinction, the fourth film, the one with only an 18% on Rotten Tomatoes, made over $1 billion. The box office kept climbing as some of the quality was a little bit questionable amongst critics and online haters. So this is an interesting one because you can find a lot of people on the internet that absolutely hated these movies. But if you look at the numbers, more and more people were buying tickets to these films. So I think easily, without question, the biggest gap between critical hate and audience love goes to Transformers 2 through 4. If you enjoyed this video, remember it was proposed by my supporters over on Patreon. Every single week I have exclusive videos, a weekly 90-minute AMA. There's normally like 10, 15 of us in there, so I can answer everybody's questions. It's a way to actually kind of get to know me a little bit better, and I can actually have a back and forth with you a little bit, which is a lot of fun. If you're interested, check out the link in the description.